really attracted you to make a documentary about like comedy and comedians overall?
The concept of the film, the concept of misery in comedians was someone else's. Becky Newhall is her name. She's one of the financiers and producer on the film. She was developing the idea of doing a documentary about stand-up comedians who specifically suffer from clinical depression. She then talked to a guy who was my producing partner at the time, Burton Ritchie, and still is. He and I had been developing a script of mine for me to direct. But when those two spoke, and Becky shared the idea, along with the great title, which was hers, Misery Loves Comedy, he, because of his knowledge that I wanted to direct, but also because he knew I'd been booking the talent for and honing interview skills for 5 years for my internet talk show, along with my desires to do direct a film, but also that I've been in stand-up for my entire life. It all sort of made sense that I might be the one to sort of guide this into the next phase. Made sense to them, then it made sense to me. So it was their idea, and then it was quite easy for me to run with it at that point. So, but the genesis was theirs.
What was it like putting together such an impressive roster of comedians?
Well, yes, booking the talent. For any filmmakers out there who are wondering how to get famous people to be in your movie, I would simply suggest that you don't pay them. That is the best way to get them, because then you don't have to deal with agents or managers or lawyers. You just get them to sign a release, and if they like you and they like the subject, then they'll show up. It could be reduced to being that easy, or it could be that I went out to everyone I'd spoken to while doing the chat show for 5 years and beyond, not just stand-ups, but people who are connected to choosing a life of creating funny and living and dying by the audience's reaction, be they filmmakers or actors, not just stand-ups. And then, you know, we had to treat it like a film shoot at some point, so we had 4 consecutive 5-day weeks, and whoever was available was who we got. And they had to fit into those 4 consecutive 5-day weeks, or they didn't. So we had 25 lined up before we started shooting, which I thought would be perfect and enough. And we needed an hour and a half, 25 people talking for an hour, I should be okay. But then as we were shooting, people kept saying yes, and by the end we had over 60 people, almost 70 hours. And then it became a Herculean task to edit 70 hours into 94 minutes, which I mostly did on my own.
And you have so many talented people who have varying levels of experience. I was wondering if there's anybody who maybe surprised you with their level of insight or had something to say that you didn't expect coming from the source?
Well, yeah, I mean, the reason John Vorhaus is given a writing credit along with me is that he helped put together some questions. That's all the writing that was done was the questions. I wrote a shit ton of questions, he wrote some, put them together. And then from that 40 or 50 questions, I could sort of create the conversation. But I had no idea what answers were coming. I just knew, again, experiencing from interviewing people on the chat show for 5 years, that if you do your research, in terms of the chat show, you know, I have a research producer who treats it like a journalist would and fully researches the subject. And here I had people who had been living the subject. So I had to ask questions that would potentially elicit a conversation in areas that ultimately I wanted to be in the film. But whatever they chose to share, whatever level of honesty they chose to go to, get to, was in their control. So I was constantly surprised, which would be the long answer. Constantly amazed and thrilled with the places people were able to go to and discuss.
No, just
I hate it when you two fight.
No, I was gonna say, some of the stuff, it's a very funny movie, but there's like the edge of tragedy there. It's like, I mean, you dedicated it to Robin Williams. Did you interview him for the film, or was he?
If I interviewed him for the film, he would have been in the film. No, there was a case where, like many people, like I said, we had 4 consecutive 5-day weeks to shoot, and he wasn't available. He was shooting his TV show. working those exact same 5-day, 12, 14 hours a day on the single camera show, those 4 weeks, and he just wasn't available. And we spoke on the phone twice during those 4 weeks, almost an hour each time, because he didn't want to get off the phone. He wanted to keep talking about the subject matter and what it meant to him, what it meant to me, and what he thought this film could be. And, you know, he'd been a mentor of mine since I was 20, a friend. And so when I was editing the film, he passed away, and my producers asked, do you want to get a little crew together and go out and interview some more comedians that maybe are already in the film? Just ask them how they feel about this passing, and include it in the film because it seems germane to the subject and the conversation. And I felt that was too manipulative. That was too taking advantage of a horrific situation. So dedicating the film to him just became an obvious choice, not only because of his tragic passing, but more because of what he meant to me and what he's meant to comedy and what he's meant to fans of comedy, which is ultimately at the center of what the film is and hopes to be.
It's also just, you did, like Mitch Hedberg had died, and you talked to his widow.
Right.
And it's like the film sort of is not, that's, I'm just surprised it doesn't deal with like the real darkness of it.
Real darkness of his passing?
No, just how dark, some of the comedians can get. Stuff like that where, they're on the edge of the tragedy of that.
So, the question is,
Why
did it not deal more with the darkness?
It's a funny film, but it just was like, I just was curious. I mean, because you've got, to me, like passing Hedberg was always so tragic, and then Robin Williams and stuff.
Well, I had to make sure it wasn't a biopic. I had to make sure it wasn't about any one individual's tragedy. I had to make sure it wasn't about the journey into darkness for any one famous performer or a small group of famous performers, but rather make it about the pursuit of comedy and the articulating of misery, which to me is a more interesting story than what caused someone to become addicted to drugs and die. I would rather speak to and listen to incredibly funny people talk about their experiences of misery and their path to finding out a way to articulate it and entertain people with it. So that while I wanted to include Richard Jenny, but his family, or the family member who controls his story, wouldn't allow me to. While I wanted to include, Mitch Hedberg, people who had passed based on, in Richard Jenny's case, depression. In Mitch Hedberg's case, addiction, which could be connected to depression. That, to me, is a part of the film. That, to me, wasn't what the film should just focus on. So, I felt like there was more interest and entertaining, and even my ability to articulate the truth of all performers by not spending too much time on any one performer or any one cause of death. So if you have Jeffries talking and being ridiculously funny, his talking about the family of basketball spinning unicyclists is my favorite. It's not my favorite, but it's my funniest moment in the film. When he says, that's got to be one person's passion. There's no way the rest of the family went, yeah, me too. And I asked him, is that a bit from your act? And he said, no. And then afterwards, when I was editing, I said, this moment is still in the film. You sure that wasn't a bit from your act? And he said, no. And I said, well, it should be. You should put that in your act because it's crazy funny. And he said, no, I said it just there in the moment, and it's in your movie, and that's fine. But it was him being honest about the weirdness of family that created this incredibly funny moment. And then later in the film, in the third act, when we really deal with you have to be miserable to be funny, he talks about being on antidepressants for 10 years, on and off, and being suicidal. So now we've experienced the journey with him. We've seen him being funny. We've seen him talk about influences. We have emotional connection to him now. So that when he says, to me it's so much more powerful when he talks about being clinically depressed, when he talks about having suicidal feelings, because now we have a connection to him as a person, as opposed to just focusing on that. So that I think that bigger picture to me was always a bit more fascinating.
I apologize now because I speak really quickly, but since it's also your editorial debut, did you also have some restrictions as to what scenes or films you could include inside the film and what you couldn't?
What scenes and films?
What outtakes can you include in the film that you couldn't have? Like it would be like I was saying, assuming it's like 70 hours plus, so like film that you could have used.
Yeah.
So like, how did you choose which ones you wanted to include?
It was an impossible Herculean task, and I don't wish it on anyone. To have 70 hours, honestly, it was ridiculous. I had an epiphany, what ended up being an epiphany. At the time, I just thought it was a good idea. Right before we started shooting the first one, Freddie Prinze Jr. talking about his dad on camera for the very first time. My better half, who's the head writer for the chat show, has a genius level for attention to detail. So I said, let's put you in front of your laptop, headphones on, and time code sync to the sound. And while I'm doing the interviews, you take notes, but take notes specifically with buzzwords, keywords, cryptic phrases, and then put the time code right next to it. So then later, when I'm going through 70 hours of material, I have time codes and keywords and phrases to refer to, which then allowed me to sort of hone in on similar keywords from different people, though they're all talking about their parents who did or didn't support them. And then that would ultimately would create a chapter. Who's your daddy and or mommy? But before those chapters were created, it was just this non-linear ebb and flow with no story, no narrative. And as it grew, I realized that without a narrative of some kind, or some sort of 3-act structure, it would not have as much of an impact. It would not resonate. So along the way, there's a shit ton of moments, be depressing, insightful, hilarious, the full gambit, that no longer kept the story moving along, no longer fit into the narrative that had to be ultimately created, I felt. So, are the best moments in the film, both comedically and tragically? In my opinion, yes. Anything that was anywhere near the apex of insightfulness or humor, it had to be in the film. I didn't want to leave what I thought was the best parts out. But there are hours of what I would still consider to be, provocative or hilarious that just couldn't fit in.
DVD extras.
Yeah, on the DVD, deleted scenes.
We're actually thinking more in terms of a series of pieces, be they 5-minute, 10-minute, 20-minute, what have you, so that there would be a 10 episodes, 20 episodes, whatever, depending on the size and length, that we would then offer up as just the continuing conversation of the content. So that made more sense than just including random bits. And also, who buys DVDs anymore?
Well, it's just the term now.
You
It's
just
still.
like turned back. He was like, not me. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I have friends that still collect them for sure, and I get it. They're amazing. But I feel like there's new ways to entertain with this additional content than just special features. I feel like that now doesn't serve the need of the audience or the filmmaker in terms of how much more there is to offer.
Do you prefer being behind the camera or in front of the camera? Do you have a preference?
I would liken that to the question I've been asked over the years, do I prefer as an actor to do comedy or drama? I prefer to do both. I prefer that I get an opportunity to do them both. Please don't ask me to choose, because it suggests I won't be able to do the other one. What came from my directorial debut was something that people are enjoying. That's amazing. It's something that the Sundance Film Festival deemed worthy. Was it ridiculous? The fact that Tribeca Films bought the film before it even debuted, also ridiculous. And now, I've been asked to direct a comedy script that people have been developing for a couple of years. That came from the documentary's value and or mine as a filmmaker. So this is all such new territory to me that I couldn't even begin to answer it. But I think my answer would be, don't ask me to choose, I want to do
Okay.
both. Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah. They're wildly different, obviously,
Right.
and I do have the taste and now pretty serious appetite for. I mean, I've been asked to direct over the years on a couple of occasions. After Usual Suspects came out, we all had insane street cred in the indie world, and whether it was acting or writing or directing, there were a lot of opportunities suddenly. And I just wanted, first of all, I had tremendous respect for the ridiculous task of doing everything or working with department heads. It just seemed like way too much work.
Okay.
You know, the actors are afforded a life, whereas the filmmaker didn't seem like they had a life at all. And it was a year of your life to do a film, and that just seemed daunting. I've been asked to do Broadway a couple of times, and they wanted a 9-month run. I can't say the same words in the same order, 8 shows a week for 9 months. The first 3 months would be the greatest experience of my life. I can't believe it, I'm on Broadway, people give a shit, this is amazing. The middle 3 months would be, yeah, this is pretty good. And then the third 3 months, there'd be a gun in my mouth every night before I went out on stage. So the notion of living with material and a project and a thing for a year, you know, I didn't have the need and desire to be, I'm not a control freak, and that seemed like a big part of the job also. But after spending 9 months in the vacuum of an editing bay that I created in my dining room on my own, and in pushing the buttons and creating little tiny pieces and connecting moments that didn't
So wait, that was all you? You
exist.
assistant?
Well, I had a 2-time Academy Award winner for visual effects in Robert Legato, Titanic and Hugo, been shooting second unit for Scorsese since The Aviator, doing visual effects on all his movies and others. A genius and a pal who we just happened to be on the phone when I told him I was about to do this. And he said, let me know how I can help. And I said, well, you've been editing, so please edit. And he said, yes. So that allowed me to then create a 10-minute sort of teaser, which acted as a template. We shot September and October. The financiers asked me for this 10-minute teaser to show to other potential investors. So that was a gift because it forced us to make something and take 70 hours and somehow create 10 minutes of something. And what that was really fast and very rapid fire and no real story, just one person finished another person's sentence and added up to funny and entertaining. And then he was about to direct a movie and I had to let him go. So then he showed me the basic steps on Adobe Premiere Cut on how to use 2 screens and sit and create bits and bins and moments and things. And then I went off on my own and expanded the 10-minute treatment teaser originally and then eventually it got so big that I had to create chapters and again, find a story and a narrative all on my own in a vacuum. And then once I had cut the film in its completion a half dozen times and showed it to people and made some adjustments, I then brought in another editor, Dylan King, who had been editing for 20 years, to help with the transitions and that aspect of it. But I really felt as though I had cut the film and learned more about that part of storytelling. Every director I'd ever worked with and talked to had always insisted, as we've all heard, that editing is the final rewrite. But as a writer, member of the Writers Guild since 1987, as a storyteller, be it stand-up or in screenplays or whatever, I always knew that it was about the editing, the rewriting, the fine-tuning, the honing. And that's really what the editing process became, which was just cobbling down to something palatable. Yeah.
You know, your film sets out to answer the question, you have to be miserable to be funny. But, you know, since a lot of the people that you interviewed are rich and famous, by osmosis, are you also answering the question, does money buy happiness? I guess it doesn't. If these people, you know, they've attained a certain amount of fame, a certain amount of wealth, and yet they still have these issues, maybe Robin Williams being one of them, that money obviously doesn't buy happiness. So was that a question that...
Money buys expensive misery.
Oh, that's a good yeah, I like that. That's a good quote.
The truth is, the benefit of the film is that it forced me to realize and focus on the fact that misery is a human condition. It's unavoidable. It's the only guarantee. It should be next to taxes and death as an unavoidable fate that every human being will suffer. So then the artist, be it a painter or a singer-songwriter, sculptor, comedian, filmmaker, we have to figure out a way to articulate either our own personal misery, or as Jim Jeffries points, or not Steve Coogan points out in the film, tell a story that allows the audience to feel like you've just shined a light on what it's like to be human, which means you've made it universal. So when Jerry Seinfeld says, "Where is the missing sock? Why can't we find the sock?"
Mm-hmm.
That may be minutia, but it is misery that he's articulating. So the comedian has to find a way to articulate either their own misery or life's misery.
Mm-hmm.
And then that becomes the fascination to the audience, that the comedian has shared their own misery or our misery through their own point of view. And so then the film tries to step back and find out, who is this person that has chosen to do this? And what is their misery, and what is their path, and what is their conclusion? More so than what is mine. You know, when the producers asked me to be on camera for the movie, I had great respect for Michael Moore and Mr. Spurlock, but it seems a little self-serving, quite frankly. Because the editing is my opinion. The film is my opinion. That's how I feel about it. Do you have to be miserable to be funny? The movie. So you hear me ask some of the questions, so you get a sense of me in the room, because I didn't want to also try to be tricky about who's asking these questions, even though it would be obvious at some point. But the idea that my opinion needed to be put forth. So there's little tiny pieces where I say, we're not like in a shared foxhole, you know, soldiers. We're more like snipers going from bell tower to bell tower. And you see Greg Proop's face when you hear me saying it go from someone who's listening to someone who, in a snap, has this giant grin on his
looks at the
face,
camera
like he
and
can't believe
raises his
how
eyebrows, yeah.
funny and insightful that was. So that's as close as I get to infusing my insights into any of this.
Well, that's enough.
But
You're there.
But the purpose for that moment being in the film was his revelation of holy shit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is ultimately all I wanted the audience to feel from what any of these people were saying. So that might be the only, and then one other time when I'm talking to Lisa Kudrow and I say how it annoys me that anyone can, ours is the one profession where anyone can kind of do, should they choose. Whereas you don't see anyone at a party dabble in dentistry.
Right.
But they can kind of
Right.
tell a joke
Yeah.
if they want to. It's the one thing that I feel diminishes the difficult nature of being good at this, is that everyone can kind of do it, you know?
Yeah.
Well, people can tell jokes, but I don't think they can be a comedian. I mean, it's what it takes to do what you do.
Well, that's clearly my
Yeah,
position
yeah,
as well.
just- I know, but it's just, it's.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't know that that's common knowledge. I don't know, and even if it is, it still bothers me that ours is the one profession that people can dabble in. I think that's the term that I have to continue using. So anyways, those are the few moments that I felt like I needed to, my voice sort of heard. But for the most part, I wanted to get as many creative, hilarious, miserable people as I could, get to know them in the first two acts, and then put the question to them in the third act. And the reason for getting to know them again was to have an emotional connection. I think what makes the Iron Man movie so wonderful, the first one, and creates a multi-billion-dollar franchise of all Marvel comic book movies, is the humor and humanity of Robert's character and Jon Favreau's choice to focus on the humor and humanity. That's what makes him charming. Otherwise, he's a rich guy with toys, and who gives a fuck? But with the humor and humanity, you have a story that I care about. And so I just kept coming back to the humor and the humanity throughout the editing process, and trying to include both all the way to the end.
You know, considering your background in comedy, which is vast, I find it very ironic that your most famous film role is in a drama. And by that I mean A Few Good Men. So I'm wondering...
You find it.
Well...
I find it redonkulously ironic and unfortunate.
well,
Yeah, it's a left-hand turn that I was not planning on making. Avalon was the first noticeable film, but it was also the first dramatic work I'd ever done. I was not trained to be an actor. I'm not proud of that. It just happens to be a fact. I just went on auditions. That's what you do if you want to be an actor. You learn how to audition,
You learn your lines.
and then someone decides you can act. So then, but after A Few Good Men in Casino and Unusual Suspects, it was over. I was a dramatic actor. And even in the case of the Grumpy Old Men movies, I'm playing straight men of Math Allen Lemon. It is the irony of my film career, considering I came from stand-up comedy, and my most honed chops would be in comedy. So that's not lost on me in any way, shape, or form.
Well, you know, Jackie Gleason once said, I guess after he appeared in The Hustler, he's seen a lot of great comedians do good dramatic film work, but he's never seen a dramatic actor do stand-up comedy. So I think that says a lot for comedic actors. So the fact that you were able to be so convincing in A Few Good Men, where you're constantly angry in that movie, are you channeling your inner misery, or are you just a great actor?
Neither.
No, I would say great actor.
No, it's a Aaron Sorkin, so you know it's nearly impossible to mess it up. And you've got Rob Reiner in his first 7 movie stretch, which is arguably one of the most impressive bodies of work by any director in terms of diversity. Each one of the 7 first films were wildly different than the next and the one prior. So it's very, very difficult, not again to be self-deprecating or take anything away from what I was able to achieve. The truth of the matter is, you would be hard-pressed to fuck that part up. My task was to hold my own against great actors. So I got to be the one that people didn't know in that film. And that contributed. However people discover you is how they know you. So that contributed greatly to my alleged abilities and foothold. But in terms of dramatic actors being stand-up comedians, look, America's #1 fear about death is public speaking.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something people are wired to do. So whether you're a dramatic actor or a plumber, the idea of wanting to stand in front of strangers and make them laugh, it's one of the reasons that I was so interested in doing the film. and to open the story up beyond do you have to be miserable, but to who are these people? Honestly, what the fuck is the matter with them? That became much more interesting to me than just the third act.
Can you tell by looking at you personally, watching a stand-up, whether they have the ability to be a serious actor or do a comedy
Yeah.
TV?
Yeah, I saw Chris Rock and thought it was going to take him a long time to be believable as a dramatic actor.
Mhm.
Because he spoke such great truth on stage, singularly, in his own voice, that I thought it would take him some time to be able to articulate other people's words in a dramatic way that would be believable, and I think it did take a very long time for him.
Think you do it with most stand-ups, say Robin Williams, he can do all kinds of things just from watching his comedy? Richard Pryor, you could
Not
probably.
not always, but Jim Brooks in the movie talks about Richie Pryor, I still love, he calls him Richie. Being a true actor and great character work as a stand-up. Yeah, I think if you're looking for that, you could probably watch most known comedians with that question in mind, and you could break it down right in the moment, right there. That's where they show they could be an actor. Or you could watch someone's whole set and go, yeah, this. Because as a solo art form, you're the writer, the director, the editor, the producer, the performer. You're not taught to listen, which is all acting ultimately is. Listening and reacting. So you have to listen to the audience, but you've created the tempo and you know where the laughs are going to be. So all you ultimately hear is whether you're right, which takes it right back to being a solo endeavor. So we're not trained as comedians to listen and to interact and to react to what anyone's saying and give an honest face. So it isn't any comedian's fault that they're not naturally a good actor or show any potential. In my case, it was literally a fluke gift. In baseball, you would say a phenom or a natural. There was no training, as I said. So I either had the ability to be as loose in front of a camera as I felt on stage in front of an audience, or I didn't. And when I finally got to work with J.T. Walsh and A Few Good Men, who was one of the great actors, and confessed to him, I don't know what I'm doing, honestly, you guys are amazing, and I'm up against brilliant actors, which was certainly the case in Avalon as well, a few years before. And he said, you're already doing a technique that people study for decades to learn, which is less is more. You're already doing less is more, because all I wanted was to not be caught acting. And he said, you're already doing less is more, without knowing what the hell you're doing. All you need to learn is that there's a second half to that. Less is more, nothing is best. If you can actually do nothing in a scene and steal focus, you win. Which if you look at some of his work, he's the best at it. So, I was just a natural.
Last question.
Are there any other subjects you want to tackle on film, documentary style?
You know, I don't know about the documentary style. It was so hard and so much more than I bit off. And given this very, very recent opportunity to direct a comedy film is enthralling, and my own sort of suspense thriller that I wrote that's been developing for a while are the next two projects that I'll direct. Yeah, I feel like I did myself a solid by doing the documentary first for the editing experience, more so than anything, because that's where the story was created. That's where the narrative was created. And I did myself a solid by going through that horrible fire. But it's way too daunting to return to anytime soon. Yeah. I feel like I may have fooled enough people this time to try to tempt fates again. Yeah.
Well, job well done.
Thank you.